Welcome. I'd like to give a brief overview of the access control mechanism of Open eSign forms. Access control is made up of three main components. We have users, we have groups, and then we have the permissions that we assign to the groups. Most users of the system will be defined in the system. Their user IDs will be their email address, and they'll have a password that they choose. But there is a whole set of what we call external users, and they're distinct. They don't have permissions associated with them, but they're typically the people that you're sending contracts to, whether that be potential new hires, whether it's a sales agreement to a customer, these sorts of things. Those users who will come in and just make use of the system to sign and fill out documents, they're called external users. But again, we're only going to focus here now on users that are given access to the system with permissions. Groups are basically a way to bundle one or more users together. All the permissions are set to a group, and so if you really want to assign permission to a user or more, you assign that to the group, and then you put the appropriate users into that group. For a typical company, there will probably be three main groups. You might have, we built one here called Sample Company, and the idea here is that this would be a group that would hold all of the users that belong to Sample Company. We might also have a group called Manager of the Sample Company, and that would include people who are able to manage other users. So if they have a series of employees who are working on the system, the manager would be able to see across all of those employees. And then we have an administrator function, and they're typically the ones who create new users, reset passwords, set up permissions and things like that. They may function something like a manager, but their job is really much more having to do with configuring the system and so forth. Now if I go back to the Sample Company group that we have, we'll see that the members of this group, we have three of them. We have what we call a user, a manager, and an admin account that we've set up to belong to the company. If we were to look at just the admin company group, you'll see just the admin users in that one. And if we were to look at the manager group, only that manager user belongs to the group. Now, permissions are attached to pretty much every object in the system. Groups are a little bit special, but one of them is this group record itself that I'm configuring down here has permissions associated with it. And that's what is under this, permissions to access this group. And these are actually quite standardized. We usually have a list permission, and that says who can list or see this group's name in a list. So if there's a drop-down list to select groups, in fact, like how this group lists over here are, you would need to have list permission to be able to even see that group. The view details says, can I even see this record? So this entire record that we're looking at, can I see that, the details of it? Then there's a create or create like, and so if you're allowed to create new groups or new records, you will need that permission. If you want to be able to make changes to this group, you'll need update permission. And if you ever need to be able to delete this group, you would have to be in here. So in this case, you'll see that I'm actually logged in right now as a system administrator account. And so I'm able to set up and see pretty much all the users and everything in the system. But in this case, you'll see even though I allow the admin to manipulate this group, I don't want them to even be able to delete it. Another aspect of this of a group is how do you get access to the users that are inside of the group? And so that's where this set of permissions come from. So these groups basically are allowed to also list the users in the group. And so I gave that to the manager and to the administrator so that they can see other users who are in that belong to this company's group. When it starts coming to the details of managing those users though, we have left that strictly to the administrator. So now if I go over to the users that we've created, we have some in here. And so first we'll pick the general user. So this is an example of a user account who just belongs to the company. And so if we were to look at the groups, he belongs to sample company. If we were to look at the manager, you'll see the manager belongs to sample company as well as in the manager group. And then if we're looking at the administrator, you'll see that he is part of the administrator group. If we need to change those on the user, we can actually update the groups that they belong to right here. And of course, from the groups page, you are also able to say who the members are. So now we'll take a look at a user record. The login name in Open eSign Forms is the email address, so that'll be the email address they'll use to log in along with their password. Users are allowed to select their own time zones, and that's so depending on where they are in the world, they can pick a time zone that makes sense for them when they see times. Now, if I were going to create a new user like this user, I would first decide, well, is the new user an administrator, a manager, or a regular user? If they were just like a regular user, I can just select one that's like it. I'll click Create Like, and then I will create whatever the new user's name is. So just for simplicity, I'm going to just make a number 2. And since we'll take a look at their member, yep, I really only want him to be a regular user. So then I can save him. And now you'll see I have another user. So now if we were to go back to our group and I was to look at the company and see who the members are, you'll see that user 2 is also now a member of that group, just as we expected. Now the thing is this user is not logged in yet and really cannot because they haven't chosen a password. So the same button is used to send the initial password request as well as if somebody forgot their password. So if you ever need someone to be able to choose their password, we just click the Send Set Password Email button, and an email will be sent to that user where they can then click on the unique link and choose a new password for their account. So if we were to look at the emails that went to this user, they'll essentially get a message that looks like this, which is all configurable again, but it's basically a way to say, come set your own password. When it comes to permissions, we will have those same kind of permissions on almost everything. So if we were to go to a report, and I was going to look at a sample company report, I would again have permissions for the report template, and that describes this record itself. So who can manage this record? So if I were to look at these permissions, you'll see that I've basically given the administrator of sample company the ability to manage this record and change it as they see fit. When it comes to actually running the report, that's the set of permissions down here. And again, what we're saying here is anybody in the sample company can run the report. Only the manager will have extra permissions to be able to see those external users. So those are for transactions that would be started by outside parties who don't have a login account. In this particular setup, we've said the administrator and the manager can also find transactions that were started by any user in the system. Now, it's not really any user in the entire system, it's just any user in the groups that they can see. So remember when we said that they can list users in these groups, if they have permission, then they can see those users that belong to those groups. So they really can't see everybody. They'll pretty only much see people who belong to sample company, which is what we would expect. We also allow anybody in the company to run production transactions. But for exporting data into Excel or CSV format, we're only allowing the administrator or the manager to do those functions. Same thing when it comes to the transaction activity log to see all the steps that have come about, we allow anybody in the company to do that. But when it comes to looking at those emails, which contain the unique links and so forth, we're only going to let the administrator see those. In terms of seeing all the document snapshots, which are essentially a digitally signed copy of the document at every step of the process, we're going to let anybody take a look at those. But again, we're only going to let the administrator do data snapshots and or the transaction archives. And so you'll see that's how we set up permissions on a report. Similarly, if we were to go to transactions and we're looking at all these different transactions, we set up a transaction just for the sample company. And again, we have permissions that first talk about who can manipulate this record itself. And so we're saying anybody in the company can see this transaction's name, but only the administrator can get to the details. And because of this particular setup, we're saying they can't even change the template themselves. So this would be a system administrator function that we would set up transactions on behalf of another company that's maybe using our system. Now, if we were to look at the transactions, the permissions on the transactions themselves, we'll see that we're allowing those external users as well as anybody in the sample company to start these new transactions. In terms of canceling, again, anybody can cancel, reactivate, suspend, or resume those transactions. And so that's the main permissions. Now this may not look very interesting, but what we'll do is we're going to go log in as those different users, and you'll be able to see a lot of the difference. Again, if I were to go to start transaction, see how there's a long list of transactions that I can see as the system administrator. But if I were to come in and log in as that sample user that we were talking about, the difference here is when they look at their start transactions, they only get to see that one transaction that we set up for that company. When they go to reports, again, he can only see those reports. This user has no programming, no real access control, can't see users or anything of that nature, nor can they do any kind of system configuration. So, if I were to go take a look at the reports, you'll see, for one thing, as just a regular user, I can only see transactions started by me. I won't be able to see anything else. Further, you'll notice, well, we can't quite show them yet, but there are buttons that would be here for downloading CSV and Excel data, but they're not appearing because this is just a regular user and we didn't want them to be able to download the data. Now again, this is really all up to you. We're just giving examples. When we go to the details, you'll see that they can resend an email notification, but they can't see the emails themselves. And when we come to the documents, they can see a snapshot of that document at the time it was completed, but they can't do anything more than that. So now if I were to log off and then come in as the manager, we'll get a slightly different look. And in this case, when we go into that report, we're going to see a little bit of differences. As you can see now, all of a sudden he can say external parties, and he can also do any user. So he can now see any of the different users that belong to his company. So now when I do a find matching transactions, you'll see as a manager I'm now able to export to Excel and do the download CSV. So now if I log off again, and we show you the same look from the administrator's perspective, now when we look at that report, we'll get a slightly different view. Now notice in this one, the only real difference is that they don't have the external users. But when I do a find matching and I go into my details, you'll see over here, all of a sudden now I can view the emails that were sent out. Also on the snapshots, I not only can see the data snapshot, the document snapshot, I can now see the data and the XML snapshots. I'm also able to download the current transaction data that belongs with these. So you can see that we are able, with permissions, to essentially set up users just how we want. Now this is the admin user, and again, just to show you under here, see they can't manipulate the groups or do anything like this, but they can list their users. And see how they only see their users. So I'm going to just go back real quickly so that we can see how this looks. But again, as the system administrator, when I look at the users list, I see a much larger list. And this is again because I have system administrator permissions, so I can see across these groups. And this allows you to break people into groups so that they can only manipulate the people that they want to deal with. And so when they come in, you'll see that he can in fact delete that user. So I hope that you can now appreciate the ideas of users, groups, and then assigning the permissions to the groups to limit who can do those particular functions. Have a great day. Thank you.